Sometimes we see things we shouldn't. Welcome to 4 humanoid encounter stories from Reddit. Midday Shadow Person. I grew up on an island in Maine, and soon after moving into one of the oldest houses on the island, I had an experience I can remember vividly. To give some context, the house has a front porch that had been enclosed after construction, so it is now a front room with windows on all sides, including into the house. I was around 13 years old, and I was returning from school around 2:30 in the afternoon. We were still in the unpacking process, so this front room was packed to the brim with boxes, with only a narrow path to reach the front door. I entered the house, walked to the kitchen, and put my backpack on the counter. I just happened to look up at the front windows as a towering black figure stood up from below the window in the front room. It stood up straight, higher than the top of the window, and almost as if it didn't want me to see it, it immediately ducked back down below the window. It moved much faster than any human could have, and there was no place to stand in that room, but the thing that stuck with me most was the absolute black of the figure. It had stood in front of brightly lit windows at 2:30 in the afternoon, and it was black as night. A decade later, I can still distinctly picture its movement. This house still belongs to my parents, and I still get very weird and eerie feelings in it. I hate this building I work in. I'm used to having spirits around. I've always believed in them, and they were pretty much the norm for as long as I can remember, but they've never terrified me. I remember my grandmother talking about spirits when I was little. My oldest son, before he deployed to Afghanistan, had the uncanny ability to tell me when someone was going to die. And I've had my own personal spirit I've called Fred for as long as I can remember. But this building is something completely different. I have never had any place give me the heebie-jeebies like this place does. I will crank the heat up to 80. It will say it's 78 in here, but my fingers will be so cold I can't type my logs, and my nose will be so cold that it's running and aching. I hear people walking up and down the halls. It's night shift and no one gets in or out without the door chimes going off. I heard someone sneeze in the hallway outside my office. I hear chairs scrape across the floor in the squad room when I know I'm the only person here. I've seen one apparition, a blonde-haired girl with gray sweats pulled up to her knees and white button-up shirt, walk from the bathroom to the squad room with her hand up across her face. I literally thought there was someone in the building and called an officer in. There was only one way in and out, and I know she didn't go past me. We found no one. Now I work for a tribal police department in Oklahoma, so this was all Indian land at some point, but that wouldn't explain the girl I saw. I work the night shift, and I've learned the normal sounds of the building, like the ice machine or the wind blowing through the attic. But some nights this place just gives me the icy chills. Just that feeling, you should not be here. I hear my name being called, and I mean my first name, but I go by my middle name, so very few people know my real name. We have a couple who are terrified to work the night shift by themselves, so here I sit. Now every other place I've worked, I've always had the same little, what I call, Fred pranks. Where my drink or pen will disappear and I will find it someplace weird later on, someplace I hadn't even been yet in the building. But at this place, I've been here 7 months and not once. I think maybe even Fred won't come in here. Experience with a shadow person. It was the summer of 7th grade, year 2000. I lived in a small town in a Pennsylvania neighborhood with plenty of kids my age. Almost every weekend, the sounds of kids playing ghost in the graveyard would ring through the backyards late into the night. It was around midnight when 2 of my friends and myself returned to my home. I decided to take a seat on the curb while we talked about 7th grade boy things. As we sat there, I noticed someone at the bottom of the street also sitting on the curb. I pointed them out and stood up to get a better look at who it was. The moment I began to stand, they did the same. I walked to the center of the street and they did as well. All I could make out was a dark shadow. I waved and they mirrored me. I waved my hands around and they mirrored me again. Everything I did, they did. We were all laughing, thinking it was someone we knew. Finally, I put both hands up and flipped them off. Suddenly, they stopped. A few seconds of nothing, then they darted across the street, disappearing behind the houses. Not even a few seconds passed before they come from behind a house closer to us. They had to have come up the street 3 or 4 houses, and there's no way they could have moved that fast behind the houses. They stood there in the middle of the road staring at us. We watched them silently. Then they did it again, swiftly walking behind the houses and appearing from behind a house only 3 driveways from where we stood. Finally, we could see that this wasn't a person, but a solid black mass. A silhouette in the shape of a man. Roughly 5'5" to 6 feet tall, no face, no features, nothing but solid black. Pure fear filled us and we screamed and began to run. We ran right by my house through the backyard to my friend's house. Our backyards connected. As we ran through the yard, we saw this thing one last time standing beside the neighbor's garage, just watching us. As far as I know, none of us has seen it again. We all saw the same thing and we all recall this happening. It's not often I chalk something up as paranormal, but I do believe in these things. This is something I'll never forget. The Karachi Man. The indigenous people of Australia have up to 75 different dialects depending on the region where they come from. So the name of this being could be called something entirely different in the other dialects, but my local tribe called it the Karachi Man. Growing up in an outback town, you get a lot of freedom you take for granted, but that freedom could also get you into trouble. Big trouble. This occurred when I was about 11 years old in my hometown. My Aboriginal friend and I were walking around town bored out of our brains during the school holidays. The rest of our friends had gone away for the holidays, so we decided to go fishing in a secret spot down by the old Aboriginal encampment where they moved after the occupation of their land in our area, which was about 15 kilometers out of town. We headed around to the butchery to pick up meat for Yabbies, to his house for rods and traps, and then to my house for food, drinks, and a shovel. We planned to dig for worms out by the river. We got all the necessary supplies and headed out along the side of the highway. We were walking and talking and stuffing around when we finally got there. We headed down the sand road and come across the fence that blocked off the sacred land. There was a statue of some sort on the boundary and my mate stopped and said a few words. He always said that his dad told him to do it, otherwise the bad spirits could see us. I told him that was silly and skipped it. We go down the back of the camp and walk on another kilometer or so and find our spot. All the noises of the bush were there, and there was a nice breeze blowing through the old ghost gums. We could see the fish jumping and knew we were in for a good day. We start digging around for worms and come up with a few big good ones and get to fishing. The day gets on and it turns out that we are terrible fishermen with rods, so we abandon them and get in the water to catch with our hands. Turns out I'm also terrible at that, but my mate ends up catching a decent-sized yellow belly, so we keep it for eating and showing off. We hadn't kept an eye on the time, and before we knew it, the sun had set. My friend starts getting really nervous and saying that it's time to get out of there and we really need to leave. I ask why, and he says it's unsafe to be there after dark. I laugh, and at that exact moment there's a huge splash in the water behind us. We both shit a little bit, but with our child bravery we check it out and can't see a thing. Just ripples on top of the water. We dismiss it as a big fish and start to pack up our stuff to leave. By the time we start our march back, it's pitch black. We can barely see our hands in front of us and forgot to pack a torch, so we kind of fumble our way through the bush until our eyes adjusted. We are walking for about 20 minutes when we stop. We can hear heavy footsteps to our left about 15 meters away. We strain our hearing, and the footsteps stop. We then realize that the bush is silent. No wind. Nothing. Our eyes have adjusted to the dark so we can kind of see where we are going. We realize we have overshot the road by about half a kilometer, and whatever is making the footsteps was between us and the road. So we decide to push on and come out along the highway further up the road. That was a mistake. The footsteps kept persisting, sometimes closer, sometimes further away. I swear at times I could hear low mumbling. I kept saying to my friend, but he told me to shut up and don't look back. It can't see us, was what he kept saying. So I push on, my feeling getting more and more uneasy. The next second we hear a loud crash come from our left on the small animal trail we were on, and my mate grabs me and pulls me off into the scrub and tells me to lay down. As we're lying there, we see a silhouette loom up the path. It kind of has the outline of feathers on it, but is ungodly tall and humanoid, but stickly thin. It's going from tree to tree not very far from us, and is looking around, snapping its head and making a low mumbling sound as it moves. It was looking for us. It keeps moving around where we were standing, and suddenly stops and stoops, looking back down the path where we hear what could have been a kangaroo jump off into the bush. The being lets out an unearthly scream that hurts our ears and shoots off down the path faster than anything I've ever seen. I looked to my mate and whispered to him if he had just seen what I had, but when I looked he had had his head in his hands the whole time. He answered, "We're not allowed to look." His cheeks were all tear-stained, and then he whispered, "I told you it would see you." We waited what felt like 2 hours and bailed out of the bushes and ran the remaining distance to town, losing our fish along the way and some of our stuff. We finally made it. Every time I tried to bring it up to him, he told me to shut my mouth or it would come back, so eventually I stopped trying. I haven't been able to sleep right since. Thank you for joining me as we explored these 4 humanoid encounters from Reddit. I hope to see you next time.